So what I'd like to do now is talk through a bit of complicated maths about coordinates and how we can calculate exactly where we want our tubes to be appearing. So we're in the understanding already that we've just got one tube at the moment, and I've got an example of that tube here, which we at the moment make appear here to start with, bearing in mind this black box is our graphics window, and it slides all the way across the graphic window, gets to the right hand side and immediately appears back over here. Now at the moment it chooses a random y position between 0 and 400 down here, which means that it could be drawn here, could be drawn here, 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 all the way down to this point here. Now of course that's not exactly what we want, so what I'd like to do is think about the random number we are generating and see how we can modify this and figure out what we'd actually like to create with the coordinates. Now as you notice, I've already got some numbers up here to help us calculate this, and some more shapes on the left hand side, some more tubes to have a look. We're going to look at the first example, which is having the tube as high up as possible. Now I would never want the situation where you can't see the top tube. I'd always like it so that it was just in sight at least. And for this reason, I'm going to say that the furthest point I want it in from the side here is 50 pixels. For that reason, I'm just going to drag this 50 down here, just so you can always see at least a little bit of that tube. Now, as well as that, I'm also aware that the furthest down I'm going to want the other tube, and I'll do this in the other example over here, is going to be 50 from that edge. So if I lay that about there, I do apologise, of course this won't be to scale, but at least it will give us some idea, and I can drag a 50 down here just to represent that space. Now, bearing in mind we're going to need a gap before I lay the tube below this one. Now, the gap that I'm going to say I'd like to start with, and we can always change this later on, but I'm going to say that I'd like to have a gap of 100. So if I just grab one of these hundreds down, and we can see that there's going to be a gap in there of 100. And over this side, that would mean that we're going to have this tube around here, and again that's going to be a gap of 100. Okay, so what do we have left to think about? Well, we actually need to know the coordinates that is going to be for the top corner of these shapes, which isn't quite that straightforward. What we do know about this shape so far is that the whole height down here is going to be 400 pixels. We defined that earlier on. So my question is, well, what is going to be the distance from here to here? Bearing in mind we know that the y coordinate at this point here is 0, because we haven't gone down any. So from here, how much is it going to go back? Well, if this is 50, maybe I'll just copy that 50 and make another one. We know that the rest of this shape is going to have to be 350. So we know that this gap here between this top left corner and the 0 line is going to be 350. That's quite useful for us to know, because we need to calculate this top left corner. So what I can say now is, out of the number that we produce, which is between 0 and 400, I would actually like to take 350 away so that its starting point is actually up here. So that's the first point it could draw. So I'm going to want to, and I'll make notes in this text box that I've got up here, I'm going to want the closest place, the first place that it can draw would be whatever we decided as the random number. So it would be the random number, take away 350. Okay, and that could be the earliest point I want it to get to. So what's the largest point I'd like it to get to? Well, that's when this blue line gets to this state here. And to figure that out, we need to say, well, we've got 50 in from here, we've got 100 in from here. Now I know that there's 0 pixels there, so between here and here is 150. So 150 take away 400 to find out what we've got left here, and that gives us our 250. So I know that this part of this blue block here is 250, which means that of the 400 pixels, we've got on top here 150 pixels left over. So what we know is that actually the furthest towards this line we'd like it to be is actually minus 150. Now that tells me that I really should be pulling a random number from between 0 and as far down as I want this to go. So in this case, if I got a random number of 0, it would draw back to here. In this case, if I got a random number of 0, of course it would go back to here. But what is the biggest number that I'd like it to get to? What's the biggest random number? Well, we can actually just look at the difference between the 350 and the 150, and it's just this gap in here between these 2 points. So the random number should just generate a number between here and here, which actually, bearing in mind we're offsetting it by 350, is going to be 200. So I actually want to change finding my random number to 200. To show you this maybe a little bit more clearly, why don't we create a little table just to show a couple of examples, but this really isn't simple, I appreciate. So if I say, for example, that I want let's get this table in view. So let's say that the random number that we rolled, so random, which I'm saying at the moment could be between 0 and 200. And we need to know the actual, what we're going to take away each time, which is going to be 350. So we're going to take away 350 each time from whatever we get on the random number. I'll just put take 350. And this will be the result. So where do we get to? So we're going to take away 350 every time. Let's do 3 different situations. And our random could be 0, it could be 100, it could be 200. So as a result, if we do a simple formula, it's probably the easiest way, equals that take away that. You'll notice that we could get minus 350, which would be in this position here. If it was a halfway random number, we'd get minus 250, which is about here. And if we get 200, which is the highest number we're going to allow the random number to get to, then it will actually plot a point at minus 150, which is here, which works precisely with what we wanted. Again, this is very complicated, and you could do this from trial and error and playing around with numbers, but I like to do it mathematically to know I've got it perfectly proportioned, so I know I've got it, so it can't go beyond 50 pixels either side. Sadly, the best way I could explain it.